My name is James Wilson, and I'm 45 years old. 3 months ago, I was worth nearly $7 million. I owned a successful plumbing supply business, lived in a 6-bedroom colonial house, and had 2 kids in college. Today, I'm about to tell you how losing everything led me to discover something that changed my entire life. When my ex-wife Sarah and her lawyer boyfriend stripped me of everything and laughed in my face, I thought I had nothing left to live for. But sometimes God works in mysterious ways, and the biggest blessings come disguised as the worst disasters. "James, you're pathetic," Sarah had said, standing in the courthouse hallway with Michael Reed's arm around her waist. 20 years of marriage, and you never saw this coming. What a businessman you turned out to be." Michael smirked as he adjusted his Italian suit. "Nothing personal, James." "Well, actually, I guess it is personal now." They both laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls like a knife twisting in my gut. I stood there in my only remaining suit, watching them walk away with everything I'd built, the business I'd started from nothing, the house where my children took their first steps, the savings account that held $6.7 million, even custody of Ethan and Ava, my 19-year-old twins. "Sue me," Sarah called over her shoulder. "Oh, wait, you can't afford a lawyer anymore. I'm untouchable now, James." Michael made sure of that. 3 months later, I was down to my last $1,000, living in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and defeat. That's when I remembered an old savings account my grandfather Charles had opened when I was born. It should have had $50 in it. I figured I might as well close it out, maybe buy myself a decent meal for once. But when the bank teller pulled up that account and her face went white as a sheet, when she called her manager over with shaking hands, when they both stared at the computer screen like they'd seen a ghost, I knew something extraordinary was happening. "Mr. Wilson," the manager said, his voice barely a whisper, "this account has been gaining compound interest since 1960. He turned the screen toward me, and what I saw made my knees buckle. The woman who thought she'd destroyed me, the lawyer who thought he'd won, they had no idea what was coming. Because my grandfather, a simple factory worker who never made more than $15,000 a year, had just reached out from beyond the grave to save his grandson in the most spectacular way imaginable. This is that story, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of what happened next. I need you to understand who I was before everything fell apart, because that's the only way you'll grasp just how far I fell and how blind I'd been to what was happening right under my nose. Wilson Plumbing Supplies started in a rented garage in Queens back in 2004. I was 25 years old with a business degree, a pregnant wife, and exactly $12,000 my father Robert had left me when he passed. Every morning at 4:30, I'd kiss Sarah's growing belly and drive to that garage, where I'd sort inventory until my first customers arrived. Contractors knew they could count on me to have what they needed, when they needed it, at a fair price. "You're going to work yourself to death," Sarah would say during those early years, rubbing my shoulders as I hunched over the books at our kitchen table. "The babies need a father, not just a provider." The babies were Ethan and Ava, twins who arrived during a November snowstorm. I remember holding them for the first time, these tiny, perfect humans, and promising I'd give them everything I never had. My own childhood hadn't been poor, exactly, but we'd always lived paycheck to paycheck. My grandfather Charles had worked at the Chrysler factory for 40 years. My father Robert had been a maintenance supervisor at a hospital. Good, honest work, but never quite enough to stop worrying about money. By the time the twins were 10, I'd moved the business into a 15,000-square-foot warehouse. We had 32 employees, including my brother David, who ran the delivery fleet, and my cousin Stephen, who handled commercial accounts. Thursday mornings, I'd meet with Richard Hayes, my accountant, at Murphy's Diner on Fordham Road. "James, you've built something special here," Richard would say, spreading out the quarterly reports between our coffee cups and plates of eggs. "Most businesses fail in the first 5 years. You're going on 16 years and growing 20% annually." The numbers were more than good. We'd landed the contract to supply the Brennan Construction Group, the biggest commercial builder in the tri-state area. That single account brought in $2 million a year. Add in our other commercial clients and the retail side, and we were pulling in $8 million annually in revenue. After expenses and smart investing, I'd accumulated that beautiful number, $6.7 million in savings. Our house in Westchester was everything Sarah had dreamed about when we were young and broke. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a pool, and a kitchen she'd redesigned 3 times. She'd quit her job as a dental hygienist after Ethan and Ava started school, dedicating herself to what she called managing our social presence. "The country club isn't just about golf, James," she'd explain when I questioned the fees. "It's where deals get made, where the right connections happen. She was probably right. Several contracts had come through guys I'd met at club events, though I barely had time to attend them myself. Sarah went to the ladies' lunches, the charity galas, the wine tastings. She'd come home talking about this member or that one, their vacation homes, their European trips. Michael Reed's name started appearing in these stories about 2 years before everything exploded. His practice handles all the high-net-worth divorces, she mentioned casually one evening, made partner at 35. Can you imagine? I couldn't imagine, because I was too busy actually working. My typical day started at 5 a.m. and ended at 8 p.m. Saturdays, I'd do paperwork. Sundays were supposed to be family days, but more often than not, I'd get called about some emergency. A burst pipe at a job site, a delayed shipment that needed sorting, always something. Ethan was at Boston College studying business, following in my footsteps. Ava was at NYU for marketing. Combined tuition ran us $140,000 a year, but I paid it gladly. They were good kids, smart kids. They'd text me occasionally, mostly about money needs, sometimes just to say hi. Sarah handled most of the parenting stuff, the calls about grades, relationships, weekend plans. Dad's always working. I once overheard Ava tell her friend on speakerphone, "Mom says he loves that warehouse more than us." It stung, but I told myself I was building something for them. Every 16-hour day, every missed recital or game, every family vacation I postponed, it was all an investment in their future. The business would be theirs one day. The money would ensure they never struggled like I had. My father had been dead 5 years by then, but sometimes I'd still hear his voice. Nobody ever lay on their deathbed wishing they'd spent more time at work, son. But I'd pushed that voice aside, along with the growing distance in Sarah's eyes, and the way she'd started staying out later, drinking more wine, and treating our bedroom like a hotel room she was just passing through. I thought we were building an empire together. I didn't realize she was planning its demolition. Tuesday, March 14th. The date is burned into my memory like a brand. I left the warehouse early for once, around 3 p.m., because it was our 22nd wedding anniversary. I had 24 roses on the passenger seat and a reservation at Chez Laurent, the French place where we'd gotten engaged all those years ago. The first thing I noticed was Michael Reed's black BMW in my driveway. I knew that car because Sarah had pointed it out at the country club 2 months earlier, going on about the custom leather interior and the price tag. The second thing I noticed was that the bedroom curtains were drawn, which was strange for the middle of the day. I stood in my own foyer for a full minute, roses in my hand, listening to the sounds coming from upstairs, my bedroom, my bed. The laughter was what made me move, not guilty laughter or nervous laughter, but comfortable, familiar laughter, like they'd been doing this for so long it had become routine. I didn't confront them. Instead, I sat in my truck for 3 hours, watching Michael leave my house at 6:30, kissing my wife goodbye at my front door like he owned the place. Sarah waved from the doorway in the silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas. When I finally went inside at 8 o'clock, she was freshly showered, cooking dinner, humming to herself. "You're late," she said without looking up from the stove. "Anniversary or not, you could have called." The divorce papers were served the next morning at exactly 9:15. I was in the middle of a staff meeting when the process server walked into our conference room. 32 employees watched as I was handed the documents that would destroy everything I'd built. "James Wilson?" the server asked. "Yes." "You've been served." David, my brother, stood up like he was ready to throw the guy out, but I waved him off. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened the envelope. Sarah wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was claiming abandonment, emotional abuse, financial manipulation, hidden assets, and infidelity. Every single accusation was a lie, but that didn't matter. Michael had crafted a masterpiece of legal destruction. The first meeting with the lawyers was held in Michael's office, a power play to show me who was in control. Sarah sat beside him in a new designer suit, diamond earrings I'd never seen before catching the light. She wouldn't look at me directly. "My client has been suffering in silence for years," Michael began, his hand resting on Sarah's arm. "Your workaholism, your emotional absence, your prioritization of money over family. We have documentation going back 5 years." "What documentation?" John Bennett, my lawyer, asked. Michael produced a box of files. Journals Sarah had supposedly kept detailing my neglect, photos of me at work during family events, bank statements she claimed showed suspicious transfers, even affidavits from country club members saying they'd witnessed my controlling behavior and verbal aggression. "This is fiction," I said, my voice cracking. "Sarah, tell them this is lies." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were cold as winter. The only lie was pretending our marriage meant something to you, James. Michael helped me see the truth. The forensic accountant they brought in was Michael's cousin, though we didn't find that out until later. He testified that I'd been hiding assets, moving money offshore, undervaluing the business. Every denial cost me more in legal fees. Every document I had to produce took time and money. John was overwhelmed, outgunned, and, I think, a little afraid of Michael's reputation. James, they're requesting full custody of the twins, John told me during a break. Even though they're 19, it affects support calculations. They're adults. How can she get custody of adults? Legal adults who are still dependent in college. Michael knows every loophole. He's also golf buddies with Judge Thomas Carter. Judge Thomas Carter, I'd actually voted for him, believing his campaign promises about fairness and family values. But in that courtroom, watching him nod along to Michael's every word while dismissing John's objections, I realized justice was just another business transaction. Sarah cried on cue when she described my abuse, how I'd isolated her from friends, controlled the finances, made her feel worthless. The woman who'd spent $40,000 remodeling our kitchen claimed I'd kept her prisoner in a loveless marriage. Ethan and Ava submitted letters saying I'd been absent from their lives, always choosing work over family. Those letters felt like knives between my ribs. The final hearing lasted 6 hours. Michael painted me as a monster who'd hidden millions while emotionally terrorizing my family. Judge Carter's ruling was swift and brutal. Sarah got the house, the business, all the savings, and full custody with maximum support calculated on my previous income. I was left with nothing except the clothes I was wearing and a 20-year-old Honda Civic I'd kept for sentimental reasons. "This is justice," Michael announced loudly enough for everyone to hear as we left the courthouse, then quieter, "just for me. She tastes amazing, by the way." The studio apartment on Belmont Avenue cost $800 a month and came with a view of a brick wall and the constant smell of curry from the Indian restaurant below. After 3 months of living there, I'd memorized every water stain on the ceiling, every crack in the plaster, every hour the upstairs neighbor's baby cried. My diet consisted of instant ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever was on sale at the dollar store. The worst part wasn't the poverty, it was the invisibility. Former employees crossed the street when they saw me coming. Guys from the country club pretended not to recognize me at the gas station. Even David, my own brother, had to keep his distance because Sarah had kept him on at the company, and he needed the job to support his family. "I'm sorry, James," he'd whispered during our one secret meeting at a highway rest stop. "She watches everything. Michael has her convinced you're planning something. If I get caught talking to you, I'm fired." My bank account held exactly $1,043. The court had garnished my wages from the temporary warehouse job I'd found, taking 70% for alimony and back support. Judge Carter had based the payments on my previous income, not my current situation. John had tried to file for modification, but that required another retainer I didn't have. Ethan still wouldn't talk to me. Ava had answered once, crying, saying Mom had shown her proof of my affairs, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, things that didn't exist, but that Michael had made look real enough. The isolation was complete. At 45, I was more alone than I'd been at 25, except now I didn't have youth or hope on my side. It was a Thursday evening when I started going through the storage unit, the one thing Sarah hadn't known about because I'd rented it in my father's name years ago to store his belongings. Most of it was junk, old tools, photograph albums, his collection of baseball cards that turned out to be worthless. But in a shoebox marked "Important Papers," I found something that made me sit down on the concrete floor, a savings passbook from First National Trust, dated January 15, 1960. The name on the account was mine, James Charles Wilson, and the opening deposit was $50. Paperclipped to it was a note in my grandfather's careful handwriting, "For my grandson's future, do not touch except in dire need. Charles Wilson." I remembered the story vaguely. Grandpa Charles had opened the account when I was born, his first grandchild. $50 was a week's salary for him back then. My father had mentioned it once or twice over the years, but we'd all assumed the account had been closed during one of the many bank mergers since 1960. First National Trust had been bought by Commerce Bank, which was bought by Republic Federal, which was eventually absorbed by Chase. The passbook was probably worthless, a relic from another era, but sitting in that storage unit, surrounded by the remnants of my father's life, I felt a strange pull to see it through. My grandfather had been a simple man who worked the Chrysler assembly line for 40 years. He'd died when I was 10, but I remembered his hands, scarred and strong, and how he'd always slip me $1 when my parents weren't looking. "Save half, spend half," he'd always say. Time makes money grow, James, remember that. The next morning, I put on my last decent shirt, the one I saved for job interviews, and drove to the Chase branch that used to be First National Trust. The building had been renovated multiple times, all glass and steel now, nothing like the brick bank my grandfather would have known. The teller was a young woman named Emily, bright and professional. "How can I help you today, sir?" "I have an old account," I said, sliding the yellowed passbook across the marble counter. "Very old, from 1960. I'd like to close it out." Emily frowned at the passbook, typed something into her computer, frowned again. "Let me check our archived system," she said. More typing. Her expression changed from confusion to surprise. "Mr. Wilson, could you wait just a moment? I need to get my manager." Great, I thought, they're going to tell me the account was as cheat to the state decades ago, or that it was closed for inactivity, another dead end in a life full of them. Emily returned with William Clark, the branch manager, a man in his 50s who looked like he'd seen everything in his 30 years of banking, but the expression on his face suggested he hadn't seen this. "Mr. Wilson," he said, his voice careful and professional, "could you come with me to my office? We need to discuss this account privately." I followed him, my stomach tight with anxiety. Whatever was coming, I could handle it. After everything I'd lost, what was one more disappointment? But as we walked past the tele-windows and security cameras, I noticed William's hands were trembling slightly as he carried my grandfather's passbook like it was made of gold. William Clark's office was all mahogany and leather, with certificates and awards covering one wall. He gestured for me to sit, then carefully placed my grandfather's passbook on his desk like it might explode. His computer screen faced away from me, and I watched his fingers fly across the keyboard, his expression growing more incredulous with each keystroke. "Mr. Wilson," he began, then stopped, cleared his throat, and started again. "This account is extraordinary. Your grandfather didn't just open a savings account. He opened what was called a Century Growth Account, a product First National Trust offered briefly in 1960. He pulled out a calculator and a legal pad, making quick notations. The account was set up with compound interest at 7.5% annually, locked for a minimum of 45 years. The bank honored this rate through every merger because it was a contractual obligation. No one could touch it, not even you, until you turned 45. "I turned 45 3 months ago," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "Exactly. The account became available to you in January. Mr. Wilson, do you understand how compound interest works over long periods?" "In theory, yes." William turned his monitor toward me. "This is not theory, this is your account balance." The number on the screen didn't make sense. I blinked, counted the digits, blinked again. $4,847,539.28. "That's impossible," I whispered. "It was $50. $50 at 7.5% compound interest over 64 years, Mr. Wilson." William pulled up a spreadsheet showing the year-by-year growth. By year 20, it was worth $212. By year 40, it had grown to $8,795. The real magic happened in the last 20 years. Exponential growth. My hands were shaking now. "This is really mine?" "There's no mistake." "No mistake. But, Mr. Wilson, that's not everything." William opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder that looked as old as the passbook. "Your grandfather also established an investment addendum to the account. In 1965, he instructed the bank to purchase $100 worth of shares in a textile company called Berkshire Hathaway." The room seemed to tilt. Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, the very same. In 1965, those shares cost about $19 each. Your grandfather bought 5 shares. Today, after multiple stock splits and 60 years of growth, those shares are worth approximately $8.2 million. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. William poured me a glass of water from a crystal decanter, and I drank it without tasting anything. "Your grandfather left detailed instructions," William continued, pulling out a yellowed envelope with my name on it. "This was to be given to you when you accessed the account." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside, in my grandfather's careful handwriting: "Dear James, if you are reading this, you have reached the age of wisdom and found yourself in need. I knew nothing of your future when I wrote this, only that life has storms and every man needs a harbor. Your father Robert is a good man, but he thinks small. You, I believe, will think bigger. But even big thinkers can be brought low by circumstances they cannot control. I am a simple man who learned 3 truths. First, money is not wealth, time is. Second, What is hidden cannot be stolen. Third, a man who seems to have nothing is often richer than a man who shows everything. I chose Berkshire Hathaway because I met a young man named Warren at a factory tour who spoke sense about value and patience. Maybe it will amount to nothing. Maybe it will amount to everything. Use this gift wisely. Trust no one completely, not even those who share your bed. The world is full of Michael Reeds and Sarahs, though they wore different names in my day. Your grandfather, Charles Wilson. P.S. Never let them see all your cards, James. Never. I looked up at William through blurring vision. He knew, somehow, he knew. There's one more thing, William said softly. The account instructions specify that any attempt to access it before your 45th birthday would forfeit all interest and investment gains. If your ex-wife had known about this during the divorce proceedings and tried to claim it, she would have destroyed its value entirely. The irony hit me like a physical blow. Sarah and Michael had been so thorough, so convinced they'd found everything. They'd hired forensic accountants, investigated every bank account, traced every transaction, but they'd never thought to look for something opened before I was even a day old, hidden in plain sight under the dust of decades. What do I do now? I asked William. First, we'll set you up with our private wealth management team. Second, I'd strongly suggest you speak with our recommended tax attorneys and financial advisors. Third, he smiled slightly, you might want to consider keeping this quiet until you've made your plans. I thought about Sarah's laughing face, Michael's smirk, Judge Carter's dismissive gavel. Oh, I intend to be very quiet, Mr. Clark, very quiet indeed. I walked out of that bank a different man than the one who'd walked in, not just because of the money, but because I finally understood what my grandfather had tried to teach me. Real power isn't what you show the world, it's what you keep hidden until the moment is right. For 2 weeks, I continued living in that studio apartment, eating ramen, going to my warehouse job. I told no one about the fortune sitting in my new accounts. Instead, I met quietly with Daniel Foster, the most feared attorney in New York and, ironically, Michael Reed's former mentor. Michael was my protégé, Daniel told me during our first meeting in his penthouse office. Brilliant, ruthless, and completely without ethics, I've been waiting for the right case to teach him a lesson. Daniel's investigation uncovered everything. Michael and Judge Carter weren't just golf buddies. They had a financial arrangement involving favorable rulings for kickbacks. The forensic accountant who'd testified against me was Michael's cousin, had lied about his credentials, and had fabricated evidence. Sarah had been having affairs for 3 years, not just with Michael, but with 2 other men from the country club. We're going to file for fraud, judicial misconduct, and racketeering, Daniel explained. This isn't just about overturning your divorce, this is about criminal prosecution. The day Michael was arrested at his office was the same day I moved out of that studio apartment. FBI agents walked him out in handcuffs while his partners and clients watched. Judge Carter was arrested the same afternoon. The local news ran the story for weeks. Prominent divorce attorney and judge arrested in corruption scandal. Sarah called me screaming when the assets were frozen. What did you do? How is this possible? You had nothing. I had nothing you could see, I replied calmly. My grandfather taught me that lesson, though it took me losing everything to understand it. The divorce ruling was completely overturned. Sarah had to return the house, the business, and what was left of the money she hadn't already spent on jewelry, cars, and cosmetic surgery. Michael, facing disbarment and prison, turned on her to save himself, revealing that she'd helped plan the entire scheme from the beginning. Ethan and Ava came to see me after the truth came out. They'd been shown fake documents, told elaborate lies, manipulated by their mother into believing I was a monster. Dad, we're so sorry, Ava sobbed in my arms. She showed U.S. bank statements, photos, everything looked so real. You're my children, I told them. There's nothing to forgive. You were victims too. I sold Wilson Plumbing Supplies 6 months later for $12 million to Brennan Construction, who still needed a reliable supplier and wanted to distance themselves from the scandal. Combined with my grandfather's gift, I had more money than I'd ever dreamed of, but I lived modestly, buying a simple 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. I established the Charles Wilson Foundation, focusing on financial literacy for working-class families. Every month, I teach classes at the community center, explaining compound interest, long-term investing, and the patient accumulation of wealth. I tell them about my grandfather, the factory worker who understood money better than any Wall Street banker. Time is your greatest asset, I tell every class, not what you earn, but how long you let it grow. David runs the foundation's day-to-day operations. Now, we've helped 300 families start their own investment accounts, teaching them what my grandfather knew instinctively. That wealth isn't about showing off, it's about security, patience, and playing the long game. Sarah works as a receptionist at a dental office now, the same type of job she had when we met. She's living with her sister, driving a 10-year-old Toyota. Michael was disbarred and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Judge Carter got 5 years and lost his pension. Sometimes justice does win, it just takes patience. But here's what I really learned from all of this. My grandfather, Charles, who never made more than $15,000 a year, who worked the same assembly line job for 4 decades, who wore the same suit to church for 20 years, he understood something fundamental about life. The race doesn't always go to the swift or the battle to the strong. Sometimes it goes to the patient, the careful, the ones who understand that true power lies not in what you display, but in what you keep hidden. I keep his photo on my desk now, right next to that old savings passbook. When young entrepreneurs come to the foundation bragging about their quick wins and flashy deals, I point to that photo. This man turned $50 into $13 million. I tell them, not through tricks or schemes or stepping on others, but through patience, wisdom, and understanding that time, properly used, is the most powerful force in the universe. Every night before bed, I read his note again. Never let them see all your cards, James, never. He was right. The best hand is the one nobody knows you're holding until the moment you lay it on the table and take everything. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear that patience and wisdom can overcome any betrayal. Leave a comment below about a time when patience paid off in your life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of triumph over adversity. Remember, sometimes the biggest blessings come disguised as the worst disasters. You just have to be patient enough to see them bloom.